Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Late October 2022 found me pulling back-to-back shifts at a convenience store just outside Columbus, Ohio. I was desperate to bank enough cash to finally move out of my sister's basement. My 30th birthday had come and gone 2 months earlier, celebrated only by a gas station cupcake and a disappointed text from my mother. Not exactly a triumphant moment after dropping out of nursing school. Still, the night shifts paid well, and usually, I had the place to myself after midnight. The station sat on the corner of Route 23 and some nameless back road, surrounded by nothing but acres of cornfields and the flickering yellow lights of the occasional distant farmhouse. This particular Thursday night was totally dead. I was just restocking the energy drinks, counting the minutes until I could flip the sign and lock up at 2:00 a.m. The woman walked in at exactly 10:47. I remember because I just checked my phone, calculating how long until I could start mopping. She opened the door so gently that the bell barely made a sound, just a soft, metallic whisper that made me look up from the inventory clipboard. She wore a long, beige trench coat that dropped past her knees, the kind my grandmother used to call a duster. Her dark hair was pinned straight, like she'd spent an hour brushing it. But it was her gait that immediately felt wrong. She glided across the floor without any of the usual noises. No squeak of rubber, no click of a heel. Just a strange, smooth motion, like she was ice skating. She reached the counter and stood there for about 10 silent seconds, staring at a spot somewhere over my shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice had a steady, measured rhythm, almost like she was reciting a memorized script. "May I have the key to your restroom, please?" Each word fell from her mouth with perfectly equal spacing. There was no haste, no natural pause for breath. Just a mechanical delivery that made the fluorescent lights above us suddenly feel too harsh. Her hands remained tucked deep in her coat pockets the entire time, and I realized she hadn't blinked. Her wide brown eyes were open so unnaturally that the whites were visible all around the iris. The restroom key hung on a ridiculous, oversized wooden paddle behind me, a system my manager, Gary, implemented to stop people from walking off with it. As I turned to grab it, I felt her presence shift closer to the counter, though I still hadn't heard a single movement. That's when the smell hit me. It wasn't unpleasant, but definitely eerie. Like fresh detergent mixed with something metallic, the taste you get in your mouth right before you pass out. I handed her the key, and her fingers finally emerged from the coat. They were pale, almost bluish under the store lights, with nails filed down to the quick. She enclosed the paddle without actually gripping it, just letting it rest against her palm. Then she turned and glided toward the restroom in the back. The restroom was about 30 feet away, past the coffee makers and the chip aisle. I tracked her the entire way, waiting for a footstep, but there was only the hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of a faulty light near the ATM. She reached the door, turned the handle with that same loose grip, and vanished inside. The door shut with a heavy thunk that seemed far too loud for how lightly she'd pushed it. Then, silence. Just me behind the register, my chest uncomfortably tight. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I started getting antsy about closing time. The register still needed to be counted. The floors mopped. Gary had a checklist he'd review on the security cameras. But the woman hadn't reappeared, and the paddle key had to be returned to the counter. At the 15-minute mark, I walked over and knocked. Softly at first, then harder. "Ma'am, is everything okay in there? We're closing in about 20 minutes. Nothing. No running water, no flushing toilet. Just a total void of sound." I pressed my ear to the door. The wood felt strangely cold, colder than it should have been, like a freezer door. That's when I heard a loud slam. The sound of the restroom door being shoved open with tremendous force. But I was standing right there, my hand still on the handle, and the door hadn't budged. The slam came from inside, behind the door I was touching, which made no sense. There was only a toilet, a sink, and 3 walls. I jumped back and waited, expecting her to emerge, maybe embarrassed, but the door remained shut. Another minute crawled by before I tried the handle. Locked, of course. My master key was in the office. As I headed back there, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The office was a cramped space behind the counter with a desk and the security monitors. My hands fumbled with the keyring, but my eyes were glued to the restroom door through the window. Still closed, still silent. When I finally found the master key and started back, I stopped dead. The coffee pot, which I had turned off an hour ago, was steaming. Not brewing, steaming, as if someone had poured boiling water into the empty carafe. The smell of burnt metal choked that corner of the store, and I had to cover my nose as I passed. At the restroom door, I hesitated. I suddenly dreaded finding out what was inside. But I had to check. Gary would see on the camera that I'd left someone locked in all night. The key turned easily. I pushed the door open to find nothing. The restroom was empty and spotless. No woman in a beige coat. No sign that anyone had been there. The toilet seat was down. The sink was dry. The trash can was empty. But the wooden paddle key was also gone. Not on the floor, not on the sink. Nowhere. The fluorescent bulb above the mirror flickered once, casting odd shadows that made me back out quickly. I stood in the chip aisle, staring. She had definitely gone in. I'd watched her, handed her the key, heard the slam. Where could she have gone? No windows, no other doors, just 3 walls and a 7-foot ceiling with panels that hadn't been touched in years. I checked outside. Maybe she'd somehow slipped past me when I was in the office, though I'd watched the main door the whole time. The parking lot was empty under the harsh sodium lights that turned everything orange. Just my beat-up Ford in the dumpster. No other cars, no woman walking down Route 23. Nothing but cornstalks swaying in the cold October wind. My breath plumed in the air. The night had gotten much colder. As I walked the building's perimeter, I saw it. The wooden paddle key was hanging from the outside door handle. It was swinging gently, like someone had just looped it through seconds ago. Not dropped or tossed, but carefully placed from the outside. My stomach lurched as I grabbed it. The wood still had that strange, lingering coldness. I rushed back inside, locked up, and went straight to the office to check the security footage. We had 4 cameras. I rewound to 1E47 and watched myself at the counter. And then the worst part, no woman entered the store. The door never opened, the bell never moved. But there I was on screen, looking up from my clipboard at absolutely nothing. I watched myself turn around, grab the paddle key from the hook, and hold it out to empty air. My hand on the screen opened and closed as if receiving something back. The paddle disappeared from view as I apparently handed it to nobody. On the camera, I was having a full conversation with thin air, nodding and watching something move across the store that didn't exist in the footage. The restroom door opened and closed by itself on the store floor camera. Then, 15 minutes later, there I was, knocking on the door and talking to no one. I replayed the footage for 20 minutes, my skin prickling worse each time. The part where I held out my hand and the paddle key just vanished into nothing was terrifying. The timestamp never changed, the footage never glitched. Everything looked normal except for the fact that I was interacting with a person who wasn't there. I tried to rationalize it. Hallucination, gas leak, exhaustion, but the key was real. The cold door was real, and that slam had definitely happened. I even pulled up the audio from the door camera and could clearly hear my side of the conversation. "May I have the key to your bathroom, please?" Except it was only my voice asking, followed by silence where her response should have been. I never told Gary what happened. How could I? The footage made me look completely unhinged, and I desperately needed the job. I finished my shift, mopped, counted the register, and left everything exactly as it should be. But I can't stop thinking about her. The soundless movement, the perfectly even voice, those unblinking eyes that felt so real when I was looking right at them. For weeks, I tensed up whenever a woman in a long coat came in late. The key still hangs on its paddle, and sometimes, working alone, I catch myself staring at it, remembering that October night. I've never had anything like that happen again. And honestly, I hope I never do. Some things don't need to be explained. They just need to be survived and then filed away in that part of your mind where you keep the stuff that defies logic, but definitely occurred. The drive from Phoenix to Denver had become completely routine over the past 5 years. At 26, visiting my sister and her kids was the one bright spot in my otherwise monotonous life as an accountant. That particular August Friday started like any other trip. I tossed a duffel bag into my Camry around 8:00 p.m., planning to drive straight through and grab breakfast with my nephew Saturday morning. The desert heat was finally fading as darkness enveloped the landscape. I felt a jolt of energy thinking about the 14-hour haul ahead. My phone was loaded with podcasts, the cooler stocked with energy drinks and water, and I had that familiar rush of hitting the open road when everyone else was settling down. The first few hours flew by. I sang along to old tracks and watched the city lights recede into the desert's black expanse. Around 2:00 a.m., somewhere past Flagstaff, but still a long way from New Mexico, my fuel gauge dipped toward empty. The highway had been utterly deserted for the last hour. Just me, a few long-haul semis, and miles of darkness cut by our headlights. My GPS showed a gas station about 3 miles up Desert Stop 24, right off exit 287. The name meant nothing to me, but new places sprout up constantly along these major roads, catering to road warriors like me. As I took the exit, the station came into view, a small, isolated structure with 4 pumps under harsh, fluorescent lights that gave everything a strange, washed-out pallor. Only one other vehicle was present. A battered pickup parked way off to the side, not at a pump. I pulled up to pump 3, killed the engine, and stepped out into the crisp desert air. The profound silence was immediate. That complete void of sound you only find in the middle of nowhere, where even the insects seemed to be holding their breath. The credit card reader on the pump was one of those ancient models that takes an eternity to connect. While I waited, I looked inside. The interior lights were even brighter than those outside, a stark, almost sterile white that made the aisles look more like a hospital corridor than a convenience store. I could make out a figure behind the counter, a stationary silhouette, possibly reading something. After what felt like ages, the pump finally authorized my card, and I started filling up. Leaning against my car and scrolling through my phone, while the dollar amount slowly ticked up, the printer spat out the receipt with that distinctive grinding sound old machines make. As I reached for it, something made me stop. There was writing on the paper, not the standard text about gallons and cost, but actual handwriting in blue pen, scrawled across the white strip in rushed, shaky letters. "Don't go inside. Call 911. My first thought was that it was a lame prank. Maybe the last customer was playing a joke. I even scanned the area, half expecting teenagers hiding behind the dumpster, recording my reaction for social media. But there was no one. Just me, my car, the deserted pickup, and the 2 bright station buildings sitting like a glowing box in the dark. The handwriting, however, looked fresh. The ink was slightly smudged where someone had gripped the paper too tightly. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, staring at the words as the pump handle clicked off in my hand, signaling a full tank. Part of me wanted to flee, but I desperately needed caffeine, and my bladder was starting to protest the 3 energy drinks. Plus, my rational side kept whispering that it had to be a joke. If there were real danger, wouldn't they have just called the police themselves? I put the handle back, crushed the receipt into my pocket, and walked toward the entrance. The automatic doors wheezed open with a mechanical moan, sounding like they hadn't been serviced in years. The air conditioning hit me like a physical punch. It was cranked up to a meat locker chill, far too cold for a desert night. The smell was next, an odd mix of industrial floor cleaner and something else, something metallic and sharp, that caught in the back of my throat. The guy behind the counter looked up as I entered, and the whole picture immediately felt wrong. He wore a Desert Stop 24 uniform shirt that was at least 2 sizes too small, stretched taut across his chest. His name tag read, Brandon, but it was crooked, held on by a single pin. But it was his face that was most unsettling. He had an expression like he'd just received terrible news but was being forced to smile for a picture. His eyes darted to something behind me, then to the back of the store where an employees only door stood slightly ajar, then back to me, never quite making actual eye contact. When he spoke, his voice was all wrong, too high and strained, as if he was being physically squeezed. "Help you?" he offered. not "Can I help you?" Just those two clipped words, like he'd forgotten how a customer greeting works. "Just need to use the restroom," I said, trying to keep my voice light, even as every instinct was screaming at me to bolt. Brandon's face twitched, a small spasm near his left eye, and he pointed toward the back without speaking. That's when I noticed his hands. There were dark stains under his fingernails, a reddish brown that looked like dried rust, or maybe blood, and his knuckles were covered in fresh scratches. As I started walking, I heard a soft thump from behind that employee door, like something heavy shifting. Brandon immediately started coughing. Loud, obviously fake hacks, clearly trying to drown out the noise. The restroom was past the employee door, down a narrow, inventory-lined hall. As I passed the slightly open door, I caught a flash of movement through the crack. Someone was standing perfectly still in the darkness, and I could just make out the outline of a shoulder and an arm pressed against the wall, as if they were hiding. My whole body went rigid, but I forced myself to walk normally, pretending I hadn't seen a thing. The restroom door was a heavy metal type that locked from the inside. The second I was in, I threw the deadbolt and pulled out my phone. My fingers were shaking as I retrieved the crumpled receipt. The warning was still there. The messy blue handwriting suddenly looked less like a prank and more like a desperate plea for my life. Through the thin walls, I could hear voices now: Brandon's high, anxious tone and another voice, deeper and angrier, coming from the employee room. They were arguing. Then I heard a third voice, muffled and weak, saying something that sounded like, "Please." That's when the horrible realization hit me. The person who wrote the note was likely the real Brandon, and these people, whoever they were, had him captive in that back room. I pulled up the keypad to dial 9911, but stopped. No cell service, not even one bar. The bathroom had no windows, only a ventilation grate near the ceiling. Far too small to escape through. The only exit was back through the hall, past the employee door, past whoever was hiding. I stood there for perhaps 10 seconds, trying to formulate a plan, when footsteps started coming down the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside the door. The handle jiggled once, twice, then came 3 solid, echoing bangs. "You okay in there?" It was the fake Brandon's voice, but different now, lower and more controlled. He dropped the act. "Been in there a while, friend? Everything all right?" The word friend was sharp and cold. I flushed the toilet and ran the water, buying time. My mind scrambled through options that all ended with me trapped. "Yeah, just a minute," I called back, surprised my voice sounded steady when my muscles were tight as piano wire. The footsteps didn't leave. I could see the shadow of feet under the door gap, just standing guard. I turned the water off, knowing I had to make a decision quickly. Staying locked in was a losing game. They'd force the door or simply wait. My keys were in my pocket. My Camry was 40 feet away, engine running smoothly. But that 40 feet was an impassable chasm if they decided to stop me. Then I remembered the pickup truck parked to the side. If these men drove here, it was their vehicle, meaning at least 2 of them, perhaps more. The shadow under the door shifted, and I heard him lean against the metal, testing its resilience with a subtle creak. Time was up. That note in my pocket felt like it was scorching the fabric. I made my choice. Taking a deep breath, I yanked the deadbolt and pulled the door open fast, like ripping off a bandage. The fake Brandon stumbled back a step, clearly not expecting the sudden exit. "Sorry, man," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded pathetically hollow. Those gas station burritos from earlier really did a number on me. He stared at me for a second, his eyes flat and calculating, then stepped aside. Walking down that hallway felt like moving through quick, drying cement. Every step was deliberate, trying not to sprint, when my entire body was screaming to run. As I passed the employee door, it had been pulled completely shut. But I could hear muffled movement inside, shuffling feet, and a sound like someone being dragged across the floor. The fake Brandon was right behind me, following so closely I could hear his ragged breathing, like he was fighting to maintain control. When we reached the main store area, I saw the second man. Tall and thin with a shaved head, wearing jeans and a black jacket despite the summer heat. He was standing by the entrance, like a sentinel. "Bathroom's all yours," I announced to no one, trying to project total indifference as my legs propelled me toward the door. The tall man moved slightly, not completely blocking my path, but positioning himself so I'd have to brush past him to exit. Up close, I saw a tattoo, some kind of serpent or dragon, crawling up his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept for days. "Forgot something," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "You didn't pay for the gas." My heart seized up, but I managed to pull the receipt out, the one with the warning, and held it up, making sure the written side faced me. "Already paid at the pump," I said. He looked at the receipt, then at me, then at fake Brandon, who had moved behind the counter. 5 seconds passed that felt like 5 hours. No one moved. Then the tall man stepped aside, just enough for me to squeeze past. "Drive safe," he said. The words were delivered with a cold emphasis that made them sound less like a well-wish and more like a chilling promise. The moment I pushed through those automatic doors, I walked to my car, every instinct telling me not to run. My fingers fumbled with the keys as I heard the doors wheeze open behind me again. I glanced back. Both men were standing just inside the entrance, watching me through the glass. The Camry started on the first attempt. I reversed faster than was safe, tires screeching against the concrete. As I merged onto the access road, I looked in the rear view mirror and saw them still standing there, two dark silhouettes against the harsh fluorescent light. My phone suddenly buzzed with signal as I hit the highway. I immediately pulled over about a mile down, my whole body shaking now that the adrenaline was crashing. The 911 operator answered on the second ring. I told her everything: the note, the fake employee, the voices, the second man by the door. She kept me on the line while units were dispatched. I sat on the shoulder of the highway, watching my mirrors for any sign of that pickup truck. 20 minutes later, I was giving my statement to a state trooper as 3 patrol cars and an ambulance surrounded that gas station like a movie scene. They found the real Brandon, a 19-year-old kid who'd been working the shift, tied up with zip ties and duct tape in the storage room. He was badly beaten but alive. The 2 men were brothers named Jason and Kyle Brennan, both with outstanding warrants for armed robbery in Nevada, specializing in isolated gas stations. The kid had managed to scrawl that warning on a stack of receipt paper when they first came in, hoping someone would spot it before walking into their trap. The trooper told me I was incredibly lucky. Most people would have dismissed the note, and the brothers had become increasingly desperate and violent. They'd been in there for 3 hours, waiting for a victim, someone traveling alone without state plates. The younger kid, Brandon, asked to speak to me before they took him to the hospital. His face was swollen, one eye completely shut. He just said, "Thanks for calling," his voice raspy and breaking slightly at the end. I called in sick for the next 3 nights. When I finally went back to work, I permanently switched to day shift, accepting the pay cut without argument. I never found out what happened to the woman with the abandoned car, if she was even real, and I never drive that stretch of Highway 47 anymore. Sometimes, when I'm washing my hands in the hospital bathroom and catch my reflection, I remember her standing behind that counter with my face, and I have to look away. The night shift at Riverside Medical Center changes you in ways you never anticipate. That particular Monday in early September 2017, the exhaustion was crippling. 3 code arrests on my shift, 2 of them minors, meant the paperwork kept me there until nearly 4:30 a.m. 12 hours of watching monitors flatline, comforting sobbing families, and pumping chests that wouldn't kickstart. That burden sits heavy during the long commute home. The highway stretched ahead like a dark, endless ribbon, my headlights slicing through patches of dense fog that rolled off the surrounding cornfields. Living 40 miles outside the city meant cheaper rent, but nights like this made me wonder if saving $600 a month was worth it. At 32, I'd been doing this routine for 3 years, and my body was starting to revolt. The fuel gauge had been hovering near empty for the last 10 miles, the orange light glaring like an accusation. I knew I'd pushed my luck too far. The Valero station materialized through the fog, seemingly out of nowhere. It was one of those places you drive past 100 times without ever registering its existence. About 15 miles from Riverside and 25 from my place, tucked where the county road meets Highway 47. The fluorescent canopy lights were still blazing, which was a surprise since most places this far out shut down by midnight. A wave of relief washed over me as I pulled in. The gravel crunching under my tires, the sound amplified by the profound silence. My Corolla sputtered as I coasted up to pump 3, likely running on fumes. The place looked neglected. Rust was eating the metal supports, and one of the price display numbers hung lopsided. But when you're on empty at 400 a.m., you can't be choosy. I grabbed my debit card and stepped out into the humid September air, that thick witness that makes your scrubs instantly cling to your skin. The silence was immediate and unsettling. No buzzing insects, no faint traffic, just the electric hum of the overhead lamps. When I tried the pump handle, nothing happened. The screen remained dark, no prompts, no card reader light. I checked pump 4, then 2, then 1. All dead. Through the store windows, the lights were definitely on. Rows of snacks and candy were visible, though the shelves looked sparse, with big, obvious gaps. The door had an old, "back in 5 minutes" sign, but the paper was yellowed and warped, like it had been there for weeks. I tried the handle anyway. It was locked tight. My phone read 4:47 a.m. According to the posted hours, they should have been open 24:47. That's when I noticed the car at the far end of the lot, barely visible in the shadows beyond the canopy's reach, a silver sedan, maybe a Nissan Altima, parked crookedly across 2 spaces, its driver's door hanging wide open. The interior light was on, casting a weak, sickly yellow glow on the surrounding fog. No movement, no sound, just that gaping door. My chest immediately constricted. Who abandons their car with the door open at a derelict gas station in the middle of nowhere? I stood there, debating whether to just climb back into my car and pray the fumes would carry me to the next exit. The rational part of my brain, the nurse who deals with emergencies every night, told me someone might be in distress. A medical event, perhaps. I walked toward the abandoned car, my white nursing shoes squeaking against the damp concrete. The fog seemed thicker here, swirling around my ankles like cold, searching fingers. Closer up, I could see the interior clearly. Fast food wrappers were scattered on the passenger seat. A phone charger dangled loose from the outlet. The keys were gone. No blood, no sign of a struggle, just abandonment. The back seats were empty, but a purse was spilled on the floor, lipstick, receipts, a wallet gaping open. I called out a hesitant, "Hello," but my voice seemed to die immediately, swallowed by the fog and the oppressive quiet. I touched the car hood with my palm stone cold. Whatever happened here, it wasn't recent. The area behind the station was just blackness and more farmland. Corn stalks barely visible in the distance, standing like an army of shadows. Walking back, I decided to check the side of the building for an employee entrance. Perhaps someone was taking a break or stocking inventory. The concrete here was cracked and uneven, with weeds pushing through. A dumpster sat against the wall, its lid slightly ajar. There were no other employee vehicles. Around the corner, I found a back door, metal, scratched up, with a small window at head height. I knocked hard, the sound echoing off the brick. "Hey, anyone working? I need gas." Nothing. I stood on my tiptoes to peer through the window, cupping my hands to block the glare. I could see into what looked like a storage room. Stacked boxes, a mop bucket, and a doorway leading to the main store. The fluorescent lights were definitely on. I could make out the edge of the counter, the lottery display. That's when I saw a faint bluish glow from behind the counter, different from the harsh overhead lighting. It was flickering slightly, like a TV or computer monitor. If someone was working, they were probably back there. I moved along the wall, finding a smaller, a dirtier window positioned so I could get a better view of the counter area if I strained and pressed against the brick. My calves burned from standing on my toes, and my breath fogged the glass. I wiped it away with my sleeve twice before I could see clearly. Multiple screens were back there, security camera feeds in grainy black and white, showing the pumps, the parking lot, and the interior. On one screen, I could see the abandoned car. On another, the half-empty shelves. Then my eyes locked onto the monitor showing the back of the building. Right where I was standing, the timestamp at the bottom read 4:52 a.m., current time, and there I was, a small figure in scrubs pressed against the glass. But the image was wrong. At first, I thought it was poor camera quality. But no, there was distinctly another figure in the frame, standing maybe 10 feet behind where I was, just absolutely still, watching me look through the window. My entire body seized up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stared at the monitor, showing someone, or something, behind me in real time. The figure wasn't moving, just standing at the edge of the camera's range in the shadows. I forced myself to turn my head slowly, agonizingly, to look behind me. Nothing. Just the empty lot stretching into the fog and darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the rushing sound in my ears. I whipped back to the monitor. The figure was gone from the screen too. Just me alone, trembling against the filthy glass. But then I saw something else on the monitors. The one showing the store interior, near the candy aisle. There was someone in there, a woman standing perfectly still between the shelves, facing away from the camera. Long dark hair hung straight down her back. She was wearing what looked like a light-colored dress or maybe a hospital gown. She wasn't shopping, just standing there like a mannequin. I squinted to get a better look, and that's when her head started to turn. Slowly, mechanically, like something on a timer. She rotated until she was facing the camera directly. Even through the grainy footage and the dirty window, I could tell she was looking right at the lens, looking at the monitor, looking at me watching her. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a crack in the concrete. The woman on the monitor remained facing the camera, her arms hanging loose at her sides. I couldn't clearly make out her features, but something about her posture gave me a sickening flash of recognition. That split second of familiarity, like seeing someone you know in a crowd before your brain processes the full picture. I needed to get out. Forget the gas. Just drive until the car died. But as I started backing toward my car, I heard the electronic chime of a door opening. That specific note sound every convenience store door makes. My eyes snapped to the front of the building. The door that had been locked tight 5 minutes ago was now standing wide open. The fluorescent light spilled out onto the concrete. Every instinct screamed run, but I was paralyzed. The door hung open, inviting, with no one visible inside from my angle. The "back in 5 minutes" sign was simply gone. I could hear the faint sound of music drifting out, a distorted, generic instrumental version of a song I couldn't place. My legs finally obeyed, and I started moving toward my car, fixating on that open door. I had to pass by the storefront to reach my Corolla. As I got closer, I could see inside better, the overhead lights buzzing, the coffee machine's LED display blinking 12500 like it had just been reset. And there, behind the counter, was the woman from the monitor. She was facing the register, her back to me. Same long, dark hair, same light clothing. Her hands were flat on the counter, fingers splayed wide. She wasn't moving, not breathing, not shifting her weight, like someone had paused her mid-action. I was about 15 feet from my car when she spoke. Not loudly, but clear enough to carry through the open door and across the humid air. "Pump 3 is ready now, honey." Her voice was wrong. Too flat, too measured, like someone reading phonetically from a cue card. She still hadn't turned around. My hand fumbled for my keys, fingers slick with sweat. "I don't need gas anymore," I managed, my voice cracking. "Thank you." She laughed then. A hollow sound that went on for a beat too long, and finally started to turn around. I didn't wait to see her face. I ripped my car door open, jammed the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life on the first try. In my rear view mirror, as I peeled out, spraying gravel, I saw her standing in the station doorway. Even from that distance, even in the pre-dawn darkness, I could see the detail that made my brain short circuit. She was wearing scrubs, the same shade of blue as mine, with the same hospital logo on the chest. And her face. I only glimpsed it for a second before I hit the highway, but that was enough. It was like looking at a photograph of myself that someone had left soaking in water, features slightly blurred and warped, but still recognizably me. My car ran out of gas 7 miles down the highway, I coasted to the shoulder and called 911, sitting in my locked car until the state trooper arrived with a gas can at sunrise. When I told him about the Valero station, he gave me a strange look. He said, there wasn't any gas station on that stretch of road, and hadn't been for years. The nearest one was 12 miles in the opposite direction. I made him drive back with me to check, following in my car. Sure enough, there was nothing there but an overgrown lot with the concrete foundation of a demolished building, weeds everywhere, and a rusty chain link fence. There was a historical marker sign I hadn't noticed in the dark that read, Site of Morning Glory Truck Stop, demolished 2003 after fire, claimed 7 lives. This is a genuinely unsettling story, with a slow burn that builds to a truly terrifying climax. The details like the disappearing techs and the moved car amplify the horror perfectly. Here is your revised script, adjusted for a US audience, with an emphasis on vivid language, enhanced flow, and maintaining the suspense and the protagonist's emotional state. At 22, finishing my senior year of college, that Friday night in early May should have been just another mind-numbing drive home. My roommate had bailed last minute on our weekend trip to visit my cousin's new baby, leaving me to tackle the 3-hour journey solo. The interstate stretched ahead, a black ribbon of highway, with nothing but darkness and the occasional 18-wheeler thundering past. My old Nissan Altima had been making unusual noises all week, a sort of grinding sound whenever I turned left. But I convinced myself it would hold up for one more trip before I could get it checked out on Monday. Around 11:30, the fuel gauge dipped below a quarter tank, so I pulled off at one of those isolated gas stations that seem to exist purely for desperate travelers like me. The place had that eerie fluorescent glow that makes everything look bleached and unnatural, with moths violently flinging themselves against the overhead lights. The credit card reader on the pump was, predictably, broken, forcing me inside to pay. Behind the counter sat an older woman with thick glasses, engrossed in a crossword puzzle. She barely glanced up as I handed her 2 20s for pump 3. As she counted my change, movement outside caught my eye through the grimy window. A man in a dark hoodie walked past my car, his face completely obscured by shadow, moving with an odd, deliberate slowness, as if he were meticulously observing something. He disappeared behind the row of pumps on the far side. I waited for him to reappear near another vehicle or head toward the store, but he simply vanished into that blind spot between the lights. The cashier handed me my change, mumbling something about being safe out there. Her eyes avoiding mine. It felt strange, but I dismissed it. Maybe she was just exhausted from the late shift. Back at my car, I performed the automatic scan you do in empty parking lots at night, checking the back seat through the window before getting in. Nothing there but my duffel bag and some empty water bottles rolling around. The pump clicked off at a 38 and change. I replaced the nozzle, still thinking about that hooded figure. Where the hell did he go? There were no other cars besides mine and what looked like the cashier's beat-up Chevy parked around the side. Maybe he'd walked to the restroom, though I hadn't seen any signs for one outside. Whatever. Not my problem. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors immediately, and pulled back onto the interstate, cranking up some music to keep myself awake for the remaining 90 minutes. About 20 minutes later, just as I was settling into the monotonous rhythm of the drive, I heard it. A soft tapping sound, barely audible over the music. At first, I thought it was something in the engine, that grinding noise finally worsening. But no, this was different. More rhythmic, almost deliberate tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause. It seemed to be coming from the passenger side of the car. I turned down the music and listened harder, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. The sound stopped for a moment, then resumed, definitively from the passenger door area. My brain immediately defaulted to logical explanations, probably road debris, or maybe the wind hitting something loose. I cranked the music back up, trying to ignore it, but now that I'd heard it, I couldn't unhear it. The next exit was still 15 miles away, according to the green sign that flashed past in my headlights. I kept stealing glances at the passenger door, expecting to see anything that would explain the noise. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like someone knocking to get my attention. My whole body tensed, and I found myself involuntarily leaning away from that side of the car. Then, movement in my peripheral vision made me jerk the wheel slightly. The passenger door handle was moving, just barely, tiny little lifts, as if someone was testing it from the outside. But that was impossible, right? I was doing 70 miles an hour on an interstate. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting, struggling to process what I was seeing. Maybe the door mechanism was broken. Maybe it was just vibrating from the speed. Maybe. I reached over without taking my eyes off the road and pushed down on the lock button again, even though I knew it was already locked. For a few minutes, everything went quiet. No tapping, no handle movement. Just the hum of the tires on asphalt and my heart hammering against my ribs. I started to think I'd imagined it all, stress from finals week, finally catching up. Then my phone, sitting in the cup holder, lit up with a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words, "Let me in." My foot involuntarily lifted off the gas pedal for a second before I forced myself to maintain speed. I didn't touch the phone, didn't respond. I just kept driving, my mind racing through possibilities. Could someone have gotten my number? Was this some sick coincidence? The rational part of my brain insisted it had to be a prank, but the timing was too perfect, too specific. Another text came through. "Getting cold out here." I wanted to pull over, get out, and check, to prove to myself there was nobody there. But every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to not stop no matter what. The exit finally appeared, and I took it way too fast, tires squealing around the ramp. There was a Shell station right off the highway, blazing with lights and, thank God, people. A family was loading into their minivan. A trucker was fueling his rig. Normal people doing normal things. I pulled in and parked directly under the brightest light I could find, right in front of the store windows. For a solid minute, I just sat there, engine running, staring at the passenger side of my car through the mirrors. Nothing, no one. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and checked those texts again. But they were gone. Not deleted, just gone, like they'd never existed. My message history showed nothing from any unknown number. That sick feeling in my stomach intensified. Either I was losing it, or something genuinely unsettling was happening, and I wasn't sure which option scared me more. A knock on my window made me jump so hard I bit my tongue. It was just the gas station attendant, a young guy, maybe 19 or 20, looking concerned. I rolled down my window just a crack and he asked if I was okay. Said I'd been sitting there for almost 10 minutes, just staring. 10 minutes, it had felt like maybe 2 at most. I told him I was fine, just tired from driving, needed a moment to rest. He nodded but kept glancing at my passenger door with a strange expression, then asked if I knew my door was open. My blood turned to ice water. The passenger door was slightly ajar, maybe an inch or 2. The interior light, somehow, hadn't been triggered. I knew, absolutely knew, the door had been locked. I'd checked it multiple times. The attendant offered to close it, already walking around the car, but I practically screamed at him to stop, to get back. He jumped away, hands up, probably thinking I was completely insane. I got out on my side, legs shaky, and walked around the back, keeping my distance from that open door. The attendant was still standing there, confused and a little scared of me. I asked him, trying to keep my voice steady, if he'd seen anyone near my car when I pulled in. He shook his head, said I'd been alone, but then he hesitated and added something that made my knees nearly buckle. He said, "When you first pulled up, it looked like your passenger seat was pushed way back, like someone tall had been sitting there, but now it was in its normal position." I looked through the window. Sure enough, the seat was exactly where I always kept it, adjusted for my backpack when I occasionally had a passenger. But I could see the track marks on the floor mat, those little indentations where the seat had recently been moved, fresh scratches in the plastic rail that hadn't been there before. My purse, which I always kept on the passenger floor, was now on the seat, its contents spilled out like someone had been digging through it. The attendant suggested calling the police. But what would I even tell them? That someone might have been riding on the outside of my car. That I got mysterious disappearing texts. They'd think I was high or having a breakdown. Instead, I asked him to watch while I checked the car. I used my phone's flashlight to look under the seats, in the back, even popped the trunk. Everything seemed normal except for one detail that made me want to abandon the car right there. On the passenger door handle, the outside one, there were smudges in the dust and pollen that had accumulated during my weekend trip. But these weren't normal fingerprints. They were long, dragging marks, like someone had been holding on with their fingertips while the car was moving, gripping so hard they'd scraped through the grime. The metal underneath showed through in 4 parallel lines. I took photos with my phone, hands shaking so badly most of them came out blurry, but I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. The attendant stayed with me while I called my dad, who lived about 40 minutes away. While we waited, he told me something that still gives me nightmares. About a month earlier, another girl had come in around the same time of night, hysterical, saying someone had been clinging to her car. They'd reviewed the security footage, but the cameras only covered the pump area, not where she'd parked. The police hadn't found anything, but she'd refused to get back in her car. Had someone pick her up instead. The car sat there for 3 days before she came back with her boyfriend to get it. They found muddy handprints all over the passenger side that hadn't been there when she'd abandoned it. The attendant said the weirdest part was that the mud had bits of fabric in it, like from thick gloves or maybe clothing, as if someone had been gripping so hard the material had worn away. He tried to follow up, curious about what happened, but the girl had deleted all her social media and seemingly disappeared. Her boyfriend told people she'd transferred schools, moved back home with her parents, wouldn't talk about that night at all. My dad arrived in his pickup truck, a baseball bat visible in the back window, looking ready for war. He brought my older brother, too, and they went over every inch of my car with their flashlights while I sat in the truck. They found more scratches underneath the passenger door handle, on the inside of the wheel well, places where someone could theoretically hold on if they were insane enough to try. My brother, always the skeptic, kept insisting there had to be a logical explanation, but even he went quiet when he saw the pattern of the marks, their deliberate nature. We decided to leave my car there for the night, and I rode home, squeezed between them in the truck, feeling safer than I had in hours, but still checking the side mirrors obsessively. The next morning, we came back with my uncle, who was a mechanic, hoping he could find some mechanical explanation for everything. But when we got there, my car had been moved. Not stolen, just moved about 3 spaces over, parked perfectly straight. The attendant from the night before wasn't working, and the day shift guy said the car had been there. When he arrived at 6:00 Hoodie a.m., didn't know anything about it being in a different spot. My uncle checked the odometer. It had 3 extra miles on it. 3 miles when the keys had been in my pocket the entire night. We ended up selling that car to a junkyard 2 days later. I couldn't get back in it. Couldn't even look at it without feeling nauseated. My parents helped me buy a different used car, and I finished my last few weeks of college taking completely different routes, always stopping at busy, lit stations, never driving alone at night if I could help it. The police report I filed went nowhere. Obviously, just another weird incident without evidence of an actual crime. But about 6 months later, I got a call from a detective in a town about 50 miles from where I'd stopped that night. They'd arrested some guy who'd been breaking into cars at rest stops. When they searched his apartment, they found hundreds of printed photos. Photos of car doors, passenger side specifically, taken from weird, low angles. Photos of women driving alone at night, taken through their passenger windows. And in one box, they found a collection of car registration papers and insurance cards, all from different vehicles, all belonging to young women. Mine was in there, even though I knew for certain it had been in my glove compartment when I'd sold the car. The detective said the guy wouldn't talk, wouldn't explain anything, just kept saying he liked to practice. Practice what? Nobody knew. They could only charge him with the break-ins they could prove, and he got 18 months. He's out now somewhere, and sometimes I wonder if he's found a new gas station to hang around. If he's still practicing whatever the hell he was practicing for.